Thank you, Stefan. I thought we saw two things there. One, the challenge on all the pillars Mark set up, and second idea that there's a damaging leadership paradigm that we have inherited from her and need to abandon to save the economy. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, very nice to be with you here this evening. I bring you greetings from the Spectator magazine, the world's longest continuously published newspaper in the English language, still propounding the very sound pre-Thatcherite conservative views it first propounded in 1828, and unshakable in those views. So I get the last shot at this. What have we heard so far? Well, we've had some sort of rather GCSE level economics from Vivian. We've had some amiable flip-floppery from my dear friend Professor Stern, who since he was young in the 70s, though by his hairline he may have been young in the 50s, really ought to know better than that. Because he was there, and I feel empathy for all of you. I'm a visiting research fellow at this university, so I'm often here, and I have many contacts with the student body here. But I feel sorry for you in this debate, because most of you will have been born after Margaret Thatcher actually left power. And the idea of Thatcherism you have in your heads is what you've been taught mostly, I guess, in our fine British state education system, which basically teaches you very little history at all, but brackets Thatcherism with the bubonic plague and the Highland clearances and slavery, isn't that right? So you have this kind of monstrous idea of Thatcherism. But I think Mark has reminded us that the essence of Thatcherism, not the kind of washed out Thatcherism like the failed focus group driven kind of government we've endured for most of the years since Thatcher herself did go out of power, but the essence of Thatcherism actually transformed this country. It really did. Of course, not everything about it was marvellous. Of course, some people were left behind. But if you go back to what was the essence of Thatcherism, it was largely to the great benefit of this country. If you go back to the 70s, we've had descriptions of those, I won't waste time doing it all again, but when I graduated in 1976, it was the autumn when the IMF had to come and bail out the Labour government. The prospects for people graduating then, I can tell you, you may think it looks a bit tough now, it was appallingly dismal in the mid-70s. The second half of the 70s was the worst period to be young, really, in the post-war era. And it all changed in the Thatcherite era. Suddenly, a new horizon opened up. There was a great liberation in lots of ways. So what was the essence of Thatcherism? First of all, conviction politics rather than consensus politics. We've lost that completely, actually. Then patriotism. You may think that's old-fashioned. You may even think it's vulgar or politically incorrect. But the fact is, standing up for British interests in the world in the Cold War era was a very important thing. It changed Britain's view of itself. Thatcherism was about standing up not only to the enemy without, as it were, that was potentially the Soviet bloc, but also fighting the Falklands War. It was about the enemy within, and that meant, in those days, IRA terrorism. It also meant the leadership of many of the trade unions. Arthur Scargill, the leader of the miners' union, was the enemy within, and he was faced down. It meant good housekeeping. We've heard about that. Living within your means, saving a nest egg, paying your bills on time. It meant owning your own home if you could. Now, we heard that that's a terrible thing, the right to buy policy. Actually, 1.25 million people were able to buy their council houses. It transformed their lives and the prospects for their children to inherit a house, to inherit a nest egg, and so on. What's wrong now? Well, actually, we had 13 years of Labour government where there was pretty much no social housing built. Is that the fault of Thatcherism? No, it isn't. The Thatcherism was the right to buy, which was unequivocally a good thing. The rolling back of the state. Vidya spoke of the fetish of the small state. Well, if you want to see the fetish of the big state, look at France today. Look at the trouble, apart from his sex life and his girlfriends and all that, look at the trouble President Hollande is in, with a huge public sector that he's failed to reform, hugely powerful trade unions. He's imposed a 75% top tax rate, and his country is languishing. We're about to overtake France to become, within this decade, the second largest economy after Germany in Europe, because the French have the fetish of the large state, and they can't bring themselves to address it. So let's not give any weight to that bit of the argument. Why do you want a smaller state? Well, of course, there are limits to how small it can be, but by making it somewhat smaller, what are you doing? You're releasing resources, you're releasing energy into the private sector. Now, we heard also from Vidya that what's necessary is an active state with an industrial policy, which is, you know, the channel of research and development and so on. Well, that sounds very, very much like what I remember of the 1970s, which was absolutely catastrophic in terms of industrial progress, of export potential, and so on. The small state releases energy into the private sector. What is the bit of Thatcherism that has kind of survived all this time more or less intact? It's the entrepreneurial energy that was released in the 80s. In the 70s, none of my friends, as we graduated, talked about starting their own businesses. They were far more likely to go abroad and you know, smoke dope and teach English as a foreign language if they didn't want to apply for a proper graduate recruitment, you know, job. But nobody was going to be an entrepreneur. In the 80s, that possibility opened up from the, you know, smallest level of people becoming self-employed, you know, in tradesmen to people starting businesses that became big and successful businesses. We heard from Vidya something in there about this fragile, false boom in jobs. Well, I wouldn't actually apply the word boom to it, but actually it has been a very positive trend now for 3 years, whilst a large number of public sector jobs have had to be shed to get the public finances in order. The private sector has been creating jobs at a much faster rate. The workforce is now larger than it's ever been. I recommend to you a website called Startup Britain, which has a live tracker, a counter of the number of new businesses being registered at something called Companies House, where all companies have to be registered. And it has been running at the rate of more than 400,000 a year for the past 3 years. Not all of those survive. David Cameron's figure for this is that there are 400,000 more small businesses prospering in this country than there were 3 years ago, I think. But what you can say is a very large number of people have become entrepreneurs, see the prospects of being entrepreneurs, have taken command of their own future, have, you know, grasped that part of the Thatcherite ideal of self-help, self-determination, and so on. So what I say to you is, we only have a watered down at the government level remainder of Thatcherism now. We've had 13 years of Labour government. We don't need to abandon that. We need to encourage the good bits, in particular entrepreneurship. Thank you.